Joined here in the studio by journalist Anastasia Kirilenko, co-producer of the documentary Putin and the Mafia. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And from Lithuania, we say hello to journalist, opposition politician, and vice chair of the advocacy group Open Russia, Vladimir Kara-Murza. Thank you for being with us.
Well, François, good to join your program, though I wish it were on a different subject.
Yeah, especially because this really hits home for you. You were the victim of a poisoning in 2015.
In 2017, unfortunately, I've had to live through this experience twice, and it's not an experience I would wish even on my sworn enemies. It's very painful and very frightening when you're unable to breathe, when you're grasping for air, and when you just feel your body slowly give up. I think that's one of the reasons Soviet and later Russian security services have liked this method so much. It is a sadistic method. It's painful. The other reason, of course, is that it sort of gives them, as far as they think anyway, plausible deniability. Because as you just quoted Madame Zakharova from the Russian Foreign Ministry, every time something like this happens, Kremlin spokespeople shrug their shoulders and say, oh, we had nothing to do with this. Nobody knows what they ate or drank, or maybe they're just sick, or it's their own fault. We are seeing a long and growing list over the past 20 years, since Mr. Putin has been in power in our country, of political opponents, independent journalists, anti-corruption campaigners, defectors, undesirables of all kinds, of people who have been subjected to these types of quote-unquote mysterious poisonings. Well, I think it's high time that we do away with the niceties and the formalities of saying, allegedly or reportedly or admittedly. It's absolutely clear what's going on. And to be frank with you, when the German toxicologist announced that they have definitely determined that it was Novichok, the military-grade nerve agent, the binary chemical weapon, which I would add, by the way, is prohibited under the Chemical Weapons Convention. I don't actually know anybody who was surprised to hear that, because from the first second when it became apparent what happened with Alexey Navalny, nobody doubted who really is behind it.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, you talked about plausible deniability. Let me put this to Anastasia here. Plausible deniability, but if you're using Novichok, it's also a calling card, is it not? It's the Russians saying, of course we did it, we just can deny it.
Yes, let me remind you that we are happy that Navalny was allowed to leave Russia, but Russian authorities did everything not to admit it, because it was finally a decision, urgent decision by European Court of Human Rights, but they kept him in a local hospital, saying that there's no poisoning. So it was.
And there still hasn't been a criminal investigation opened.
This is not clear. Some people, including passengers who were on the same plane with Navalny, said they were summoned in the frame of some criminal case opened, but officially we don't know so much. And also Belarusian President Lukashenko said that he has proofs that all the case is fabricated by German authorities. And this is discussed seriously by Russian TV.
Do people who watch the main evening news in Russia, do they buy that explanation?
I think, unfortunately, some people, yes, buy this explanation, and people are also afraid. Even if you are not Navalny, but you participate at an opposition rally, you can be now prosecuted. It's a criminal responsibility in Russia. So I think people are, from the one side, they're afraid, and from the other, it's, of course, brainwashing.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, did you ever find out what exactly you were poisoned with?
So both times after I was lucky enough to survive, fortunate enough to survive the poisonings, both times when I was in a coma and with a multiple organ failure, doctors told my wife that I had about a 5% chance to live. So I cannot even tell you how grateful I am to be even sitting here and speaking with you. But both times after I did survive, my lawyer and I went to the Russian investigative committee in Moscow to request a criminal investigation, a criminal probe into attempted murder. Well, and up until today, we are now on the 3rd of September 2020, we have not yet received a response. And I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not. And, we're talking about poisonings today, but it's not just poison that the Kremlin uses against its opponents. 5.5 years ago in February of 2015, Russian opposition leader and former deputy prime minister Boris Nemtsov was gunned down literally in front of the Kremlin walls in Moscow. And to this day, 5.5 years on, beyond the lowest level of immediate perpetrators who were imprisoned, no one, even half a step above that in terms of the organizers and masterminds, has faced any kind of responsibility. And for all this time, the organizers and masterminds of the most high-profile political assassination in the modern history of Russia, the murder of Boris Nemtsov, continue to be shielded and protected from the highest levels of the Russian state. So, it's the most hypocritical question they can be when these Kremlin officials...
Let me just ask you the question, Vladimir Kara-Murza, why, in this case, use Novichok? There are other poisons.
Well, because Alexey Navalny was never supposed to be in Berlin. This happened just before he was supposed to be on a plane. I've taken the flight between Tomsk and Moscow many times. It's a 4-hour flight. He would not have made it out alive. That was the plan. It is, the pilot of the S-7 airline who made the decision to proceed with an emergency landing in Omsk. He saved Alexei Navalny's life, literally. This was not supposed to happen. It didn't go according to plan. And of course, had the flight been completed, he would have not survived it. And then, of course, you wouldn't expect a Russian government lab or any kind of Russian government body to, of course, find Novichok or announce it. It's important to stress that in those rare cases when we do know the exact cause of poisoning of Kremlin opponents, we only know it because the testing was done by Western agencies. In the case of Viktor Yushchenko, Ukrainian presidential candidate, was in Austria. Alexander Litvinenko, Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom, with Alexei Navalny now in Germany. When these attacks, when these poisonings happen on Russian soil, we never hear any reason. Instead, we hear some nonsense that, they ate something wrong or they drank something wrong. In Navalny's case, initially they started saying that he had low blood sugar and the problems with his digestive system. Well, that would have been the official reason. So the only reason we know about this is because it was done in Germany. After my second poisoning, by the way, there's an interesting side story to this. My wife managed to take a blood sample to Washington, to the FBI toxicology lab, which is supposed to be the top toxicology lab in the world. They took the sample, they conducted the tests, presumably found some results, and then they classified them. And they refused to give them to me. They refused to give them to members of Congress who requested them, including the late Senator John McCain. They refused to give them to media organizations that tried to get them through the Freedom of Information Act. And earlier this year, I had no other choice but to go to an American court in Washington against the FBI to compel them to turn over this information, my blood test results. And I was shocked to see a story last weekend in the Sunday Times in London, quoting a senior U.S. government official who said that the decision to classify my blood test result came as a result of a backroom deal between American and Russian secret services.
Let's turn for a second to what the response should be now. We all heard on Wednesday the strong language of the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, denouncing squarely that poisoning of Alexei Navalny, but choosing her words carefully regarding what happens next. The same goes for the new head of the Social Democrats, Finance Minister Olaf Scholz, who sat down with France 24 Europe editor Catherine Nicholson.
There has been the attempt to kill Navalny, and we cannot agree with activities like this, and we will do anything which is necessary now. And the first step now is to get the answers from the Russian government, now after we have all the evidence which we had not before, and then we will discuss with our partners about the necessary reactions.
But just to be clear, sanctions against Russia could be an option?
It is necessary to discuss all the necessary reactions, and this will be something which will happen in the next time, but it is first that we will do it together, and this is what is the next step.
All right, we know in Germany is a grand coalition. You don't just sort of blurt out what you're going to do next, and you have to play it carefully. Nonetheless, Anastasia Kirilenko, what would you like to see, and what are you expecting to see happen next?
Well, France is not much better in that situation. We have a reaction only from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the reaction is also let's wait from Russia for transparency. Unfortunately, the West can't replace Russian law enforcement system. So, of course, what should the West do? To urge Russia to investigate. But just to give you an example, you mentioned I'm a co-producer of the movie Putin and the Mafia. So we showed evidence that Russian investigative committee's chief was on a direct line with the Russian mafia. Just to give an example, that it's really unlikely to happen. The corruption is so high.
This happening, though, again, after Sergei Skripal in Salisbury, England, the former Soviet double agent, was himself with his daughter poisoned with Novichok. Is this one time too many for the West?
I hope so. Let's quote Russian TV. They are upset. They mentioned Nord Stream 2 in Germany, that Angela Merkel was happy with the project. But suddenly she changed her mind. So as for Russian authorities, I think they're a bit worried. But let's wait.
Let me put the question to you, Vladimir Kara-Murza. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline that Anastasia is talking about, it goes from Russia to Germany, bypassing Ukraine. It's 90% complete, due to open early next year. Is there a snowball's chance in hell it could be stopped?
Well, we hear a lot about Nord Stream 2 in the past couple of days, and I'm sure we'll hear even more in the coming days too. But in terms of sanctions, by far the most important type of sanctions that needs to be applied now in relation to the Putin regime are targeted personal sanctions, what we call Magnitsky sanctions. There are 6 Western countries as of today that have passed Magnitsky legislation that provide for individual sanctions in the form of visa bans and asset freezes against officials, not just in the Putin regime, but in any authoritarian regime around the world, that are personally complicit in human rights abuses and corruption. Germany does not have a Magnitsky law yet. The European Union as a whole does not have a Magnitsky mechanism yet. This is something that should happen now. These types of sanctions are the most effective, the most powerful, and also they strike right at the heart of the rotten system of kleptocracy and corruption that Vladimir Putin has built. You know, the people who sit in the Kremlin today, they want to steal in Russia, but then go and spend that stolen money in the West, because it's not a secret to anyone that they have their bank accounts in the West, they school their children in the West, they have their homes, villas, yachts, spend their vacations, and so on and so forth. This hypocrisy has to stop, and it's high time for both Germany and the European Union as a whole to join this growing chorus for accountability for human rights abusers and pass Magnitsky legislation and start implementing it right now.
One final question for you, Vladimir Kara-Murza. The opposition leader Alexey Navalny, always outspoken, always relentless. After a poisoning like this, we know from the German doctors that he's doing better, but still in a very serious condition, had been kept in an artificial coma. How long will it take to recover completely? Can he recover completely?
Yes, he can, and I'm living proof to that. But it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be easy. You know, after the first poisoning, when I spent 3 weeks in a coma, I had to learn to walk again. Literally, this is not a metaphor. I had to learn to do everything again. I mean, I couldn't lift a cup of tea. Once you're in a coma for such a long time, your body just loses all strength, and there are certain effects on the physical nervous system as well. So it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy. It is going to be painful and difficult, but it is possible, and I'm living proof of that. And I have absolutely no doubt that just as it was a question of principle for me after both poisonings to return back home to Russia and resume my work, I have absolutely no doubt that as soon as Alexey Navalny is physically able to, as soon as he comes back to good health, and I hope and pray that he does, that he will immediately resume his work and his opposition activity. Because the biggest gift that opponents of the Kremlin could give to Putin's regime is if we all gave up and ran, and this is not going to happen.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, I want to thank you along with Anastasia Kirilenko for joining us here on France 24.